Welcome back to a special edition of the Friday Show brought to you by Woodbine Racetrack. This weekend, it's the Cup and Saucer Stakes. This is a race that goes back to 1937 when it was run at Long Branch Racetrack. I'd never heard of that track till I looked up the history of this race. Some really good horses. Canadian breds have won this race. One who did not was Northern Dancer, who finished second in 1963. Anyways, I am here with Joe Nevills, bloodstock editor of the Paulick Report, Natalie Voss, the editor-in-chief, and news editor Chelsea Hackbarth. We're going to do a wrap-up of the Triple Crown. This was, I think I've said unprecedented more than once. Chelsea, is that right? When we had the...
No, I have not kept a running tally, but it now occurs to me that I should have.
Yeah, I think you should have. Highlights, lowlights, and takeaways. That's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap up the Triple Crown, and I'm going to start with the highlight. For me, was the Belmont Stakes. Just getting the Triple Crown off the ground. I know it was only 1.1 miles. I know it was late June. I know it was out of order, but I just felt like when the gates opened for the Belmont Stakes, it just felt like there was some normalcy back, and I was just so thrilled for that, and was happy to see, the best horse win, which I don't always like to see, but so that was my highlight. Joe, what do you got?
I mean, for me, the Triple Crown saved the best for last. What we had at the Preakness Stakes with Authentic and Swiss Skydiver just throwing it down, Swiss Skydiver giving a middle hoof performance for the ages and just denying Authentic at the finish line and doing it in darn near record time. That's what I'm talking about. That's number one.
Natalie, what is your highlight of the Triple Crown series?
Yeah, well, I think it's hard to beat that performance as a highlight. Ray, you mentioned sort of the suspended sense of lack of normalcy. We've all been living in a very abnormal world, and the Belmont provided, a throwback to you for how things, should be in normal times. And for me, that was the stretch run of the Preakness. It's just you could sort of stop thinking about everything else and just focus on two horses that really loved what they were doing and both really wanted the win. And I think it's hard to beat that. It's a great reminder of why we do the jobs that we do.
Absolutely. I was going to say the Preakness stretch run, but since both of you have gone that route, I actually saw a video on Twitter this morning of Bob Baffert and Kenny McPeak talking outside the stakes barn at Pimlico after the Preakness was run. And Baffert made the excuse that Authentic was a gentleman, and that's why he didn't pass Swiss Skydiver on the way to the wire. So that's now my favorite Triple Crown memory from this year.
I'm not buying that. I don't think. Baffert's explanation. But speaking of Baffert, lowlight for me was not when he got knocked on his ass in the winner's circle, but whoever at Churchill Downs or Kroger or whoever it was that came up with the idea that let's put some ribbons on the end of the garland of roses and have them trail behind the horse so that it'll look really pretty. Well, apparently that's what got Authentic all upset in the winner's circle. I mean, that was like the dumbest thing. And if they do it next year, well, they're not going to do it next year. That's just not going to happen. Anybody else got any lowlights?
For me, it was really liking horses that broke to the outside of New York traffic. I was all about honor code, and I was all about honor AP in the Derby. New York traffic, boom, outside, took him out early in the race, and he had to fight for scraps at the end. I put Max Player on top in the Preakness, and he has the misfortune of breaking on the outside of New York traffic again. Boom, taken out, running for scraps. So New York traffic has cost me a lot of money this Triple Crown season. You and I got beef. Let's talk later.
Well, in keeping with the theme of a really bad day or bad moments, I guess, for Bob Baffert, I have to say the low light for me was seeing 1,000 Words flip over in the paddock before the Derby. And by the time we saw that video clip, we sort of had seen through social media before it played on NBC that the horse is okay. But there's just very few things more frightening than seeing a horse or an animal that large being upside down and not knowing if he hit his head, if he hit his neck, how seriously is he hurt. And it, provided a really good reminder to me. Even though he did, unfortunately, break Jimmy Barnes's wrist pretty good, we're all just lucky there weren't more people in that situation, because that could have been a lot more dangerous than it was.
Absolutely. There's that paddock. It's normally not even standing room only. You can't stretch your arms out to the sides during the Derby. And thankfully there were no people in the way when 1,000 Words went over. Probably the low light for me was that you didn't really have a pace in this year's Kentucky Derby. I mean, Authentic was up there all by himself, but you had two front runners scratch the week of the race, Art Collector and King Guillermo, and then there was no pace, and it just made it a little too easy for him.
Yeah, but that's kind of been the norm ever since they went to the.
But it wasn't supposed to be that way this year. There were 3, and it went down to 1, and it wasn't fair.
Well, the takeaway for me from this year's Triple Crown was I used to be one of those people that thought, let's tinker with it. Let's maybe stretch it out over a couple of months. Run the Preakness the first weekend in June. Run the Belmont on the 4th of July or the first weekend in July. Keep the distances the same. I've never wanted to see that change. But having seen what happened, the lack of interest in this year's Triple Crown, where betting was way down, especially on the Derby and the Preakness, TV ratings were way down, like they are in other sports, admittedly. But I just think when we get back to next year, hopefully, and it's a 5-week stretch from the Derby to the Belmont, it really is something special. And I decided that I was wrong. My takeaway is don't tinker with it. Leave it as it is.
I'm pretty much with you on there. We're very fortunate to have had a Triple Crown series this year at all. There were a lot of things that had to change for very valid reasons. But when we get back to 2021 and we kind of know what January, February is going to look through into the rest of the year, let's keep it the way we had it before. I don't think we need to tinker with this any more than we already have.
Well, for my part, I also wouldn't advocate changing it any, but I do think that in hindsight, we were maybe a bit lucky that if it had to go out of order and if we had to be dealing with a pandemic and whatnot, we're probably better off that we didn't have the Derby about 6 weeks after we had the federal indictments in early March. It sort of would have been a nasty 1-2 punch after last year, where obviously the Santa Anita fatalities were the big story going into the Derby right before our big day on the national scene. So I don't think that would have helped the general public's perception of racing this particular year. So it's not a good year. It's not a good thing that's happening with the schedules and the pandemic. But I do think that if there's a blessing to be had, it's probably that we weren't, fighting up against that headline right after or right before the Derby.
Hear you. Anybody that's listened to Ray and I do the Triple Crown News Minutes knows that my takeaway from this will be that I will always choose Tommy Drury if I'm going to send a horse to somebody. Just the level of horsemanship that he showed pulling his horse for a very, very minor injury from the Derby, because he couldn't have been 100%. He might have been 99%. And I know he ran 4th in the Preakness, and maybe he would have run better if he'd had the Derby in between, blah, blah, blah. We got the Breeders' Cup coming, Tommy. It's all good.
Yeah, and I hope Art Collector, it'd be nice to see all of them race as 4-year-olds, but this is not going to happen. So I got one more question that we did not discuss, and that is, if you had to vote today, who's the 3-year-old champion male?
Ooh.
Oh boy. Okay, so I'm still gonna go with Tiz the Law. I think strength of schedule gives him a bit of a nod here. Authentic had some wins against some pretty small fields over on the West Coast. Tiz the Law has stared down the best in his division throughout every race that he's had this year. It'd be very close, and it could swing with a performance in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Tiz the Law gets the Duke as of right now today.
Yeah, I have to concur with that. I mean, it's a good thing there's at least a month, maybe a couple months left in the season for a lot of these horses, because I think that we sort of have the classic problem of, like, you've had one horse be really dominant for half the year, and you've got another horse who is hoping to regain some dominance for the later part of the season. And it's always kind of hard to choose between the two in that situation, because it's just a matter of peaking at different times. But yeah, so far, Tiz the Law, I think, has had a little more time against better competition at his peak than what Authentic has probably had so far. So I'd probably lean the same way.
Well, while I agree with both of your analyses, I think that actually Authentic has to get the nod from me right now. He, they went head to head and he won. It's fair and square, or maybe not fair. based on the speed setup. But that is what it is. They did go head to head, and he did win. And I think that no matter what the strength of schedule is, at the end of the day, you have to look at when they face each other to figure out which one's better. Now they'll do it again in the Classic, and that can change everything. But at this point, I think Authentic gets the nod from me.
Well, the correct answer is you don't have to vote today. So I'm not going to say who I would vote for.
Wait, hold on. That's not. No.
That's a cop out.
All right. Well, listen, that is, I don't vote anyway. So that is going to do it for this edition of the Friday show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to Woodbine for their support, and we'll see you next time.